Firstly, choose your market carefully. Think about who you're trying to attract to your country. And if you're at the beginning of your tourism journey, I think aiming for quality is the right answer rather than quantity, because quantity requires huge infrastructure investment, yet quality you can bring in relatively inexpensively. And therefore aim high, which is my point number 2. If your destination has high quality attractions, historical or natural, then think very carefully about how you position your market to attract the high net worth individuals to your country. They, as I say, require far less infrastructure. They'll leave less of a footprint. If you're looking for sustainable tourism, they'll leave far less of a footprint on your landscape, and they'll try to get involved. Get your positioning right. I think I've covered that. Don't try and be all things to all men. Think about what you've really got and really promote that. Be unique. Similar point. But there's very little that's unique in the world. But if you combine the 8 to 10 great attributes of your great nation into a unique set of values, then that can work extremely well for you. Think carefully about your brand. And remember that just by telling people what's going on out there, you're not actually changing your brand, because they're hearing stuff themselves and they're getting their information from the internet, and you need to be very careful how you communicate that. And make sure, point 6, your communications are communicating your positioning very loud and clear. And finally, security. I think that's a point that's been well made by many people. You've got to have a peaceful country to attract these high net worth individuals, or any individuals, frankly. And I think that's sufficient for the time being. Thank you very much, and I'll take questions later.
Thank you very much, Ronald. And I will now call our last speaker, last but definitely cannot be least. I happen to know her personally, Rosette Rugamba, not in her current capacity as a founder of Songa Africa in Rwanda, but because prior to that, for 8 years, she was the managing director of the Office of Tourism in Rwanda, and she's the one, in my view, who made the success story of tourism in Rwanda. Over to you, Rosette.
Thank you. As the previous speaker said, when you speak last, you either have nothing to say or you have a lot to say. I'd like to start by using Obama's words. I think he started something like, change you believe in. And with tourism, and with everybody here, if you're really not passionate, if you're not believing it, then there's no point being here. What I'm asked to speak to today is about public-private sector partnership. And I think with me having had the opportunity of 8 years ago, I was asked by my government, Rwanda, to head tourism and national parks. And when we did, this was a government, and I think you all know about the story of Rwanda. There was really nothing about tourism. But again, I would like to emphasize the fact that you cannot do anything, whether it's public-private sector, whatever you do, without having the leadership of government. And this is what our government had. From the top leadership, we had all the support to ensure that whatever you want to do in tourism was actually led by government. Last year, after 7 years of running the tourism office, I opened my own company, which is called Songa Africa. And Songa Africa, Songa means, it's a Swahili word which says move on, Africa. And I really wanted to make sure that I take the success story of Rwanda, that you can start from zero and actually make wonders. But I wanted to spread the word to the whole of Africa, that not only can tourism be a key economic drive, but it also helps in changing the image, and it can also be a catalyst to so many things, whether it's public-private sector-led or any other industry that you really want to develop in your country. But at the same time, I made sure that Songa Africa is not only about consultancy, but I also have the tour operations on the side so that I do not stay theoretical. we need to be practical. I spent so many years designing policies and strategies. It's now my turn to ensure that they actually work. And that's why I keep the two operations to keep to check the reality and to ensure that the policies that we make or the policies that I advise governments and agencies and private individuals are realistic on the ground. Now to go back to the subject of PPPs, they're a must. And this is something, let me tell you the Rwanda story. Our government created an environment of peace and stability. That was an assured deal from the president. And that is why we could talk about tourism. The legal system. The first thing that was done was to ensure that tourism was one of the key economic drivers and the key priorities. There was tourism, coffee, and ICT. And they made sure that they created a legal system that made sure that all that worked. The other thing as well that is instrumental in PPPs is, again, investment, the private sector. We really need the private sector. You cannot talk about success of tourism without having the private sector. Talking about hotels, we needed the private sector. And what did the government do? They created incentives. The investment authority made sure that they actually championed incentives. The Doing Business report, I think you've heard that Rwanda has been leading in the Doing Business report. Again, that was linked to ensure that we facilitate any investor that actually comes into the country. We also need to say that one of the things that we should never forget is the local investors. In designing and working on our tourism strategy, 90% of the investors were Rwandese. And most times, one of the challenges of most countries, not only LDCs, a local investor is not given the value of a foreign investor. Whenever foreign investors are coming, red carpet is rolled out, and all the facilitation is done, but when a local investor is there, it is business as usual. So again, that is something that we need to keep emphasizing. Capacity, again, capacity, it's a prerequisite for PPPs to succeed. We need, again, here on the private sector side, to ensure that private sector also do not look at investment in tourism by just looking at hotels and leisure activities, but also looking at institutions. And I'm pleased to say that one of our biggest institutions in Rwanda was not only set up, first of all, as the first tourism institution, but also it was put there by a woman. And that, again, is something that we see can be a very viable business. And this is the role that the private sector brought in. That's the contribution, because government was busy doing universal primary education and so on and so forth. The other thing that the government did, they created a workforce development authority. I must tell you that after tourism succeeded, and we're talking about all the numbers of people coming in, but the challenge was the capacity was low. So we were now going to have to borrow the skills from abroad. We realized that when you're going to invest in capacity building, and I'm glad that the previous sessions talked about capacity, we were getting each and everyone from other countries. So the government realized that vocational training is a prerequisite for tourism to succeed. After stability, they saw capacity building, and they created the Workforce Development Authority. And that is the one that is actually feeding into the industry. So when you ask the success of an industry, when you ask why private sector should come in and help to, the government might also see the challenges and then invest in those challenges. The legal system, again, in Rwanda, when you invest, you can repatriate your funds. There are bilateral negotiations and many other things that conventions that Rwanda signed to that will actually let an investor feel that it is a government that is serious about attracting foreign investors, but also facilitating the local investors. Mega events. I think that's another thing where PPP is very important. I started a function which is called Kwitizi na Gorilla Naming Ceremony, and it was always done by the PPPs, private sector coming together. You can't do events. Trade fairs, you know very well that you cannot attend trade fairs without the private sector. In conclusion, I would like to say that if Rwanda could do it, then everybody can do it. And for PPPs, government must lead, government must be the architect. We must be like an orchestra, but also government must realize that private sector are coming in as partners, not just a by the way. And we must have a shared purpose, passion, and principles. I thank you so much.